Okay, and I'm just going to move along because we also got Miss Telford with us as
Hi.
well.
It's all right. I'll keep out until it's needed.
Yeah.
So
So we're going to do that. We're going to do it in conjunction. Mr. Stewart is also with us as well. She's just checking that we do this as professionally as possible. So she's in the corner as well, and I think she's on mute as well, which is all good. And at the moment, we've got no more people to admit. So I think what I'll do is we will get started because it's 4:01, and then maybe after a few minutes, I'll just hop back out. Now, we're going to share the screen. So what you can see, you should still see me and Miss Telford sort of in the corner, and you should really be able to see a presentation. I hope that we've done a little dummy run, so that should work. I'm going to share my screen and check it works all right. That's that one, and share. And then if I go to from beginning, there we go. Right, so hopefully you can see a picture of the Huntington Place school site, and you should still be able to see us sort of in the corner. Oh, actually, if that's going to pop bright. So we've just noticed that any new admits come along and we can just quickly pop. So Miss Telford's going to do that while I do the first little bit, if that's all right. So look at that. What a team. Okay. Sadly, Miss Hall would have loved to have joined us, but she's currently in hospital at the moment. She has made that public before, so I'm not breaching any confidentiality there. But she's just having an operation at the moment, a planned one, and she will be joining us again in the next few days. So she sends her best wishes, but obviously she would have joined in with this as well, so we could have had the dream team together. Right, okay, so basically the aims of today, we're trying to keep this sort of relatively informal, because what we really thought, the age of the children that we teach, these are really their first steps into reading. Obviously a lot of them may well have done lots of reading before they came to school, their nurseries and so on, and also with you guys at home, but we're kind of assuming that this is their first steps into school reading. So really what you guys want to know about is what could you do at home that will help to support your child be the best readers they can possibly be. And obviously during the lockdown, we had the benefit of being able to kind of sort of reach into your homes and share reading lessons with you, phonics lessons as well. So hopefully in some ways, you're probably better off, if you're not already teachers yourselves, at knowing some of the strategies, because hopefully you saw them being modeled if you were able to join in. I know not everybody could, because obviously what with the different arrangements for key workers and so on, but hopefully if you're sitting there and saw some of those, you might find that there's an element of sort of joining the dots and making sense of what we were trying to do in our phonics sessions and our reading sessions. So we're going to share why love of reading is so important. We're going to explain what some of those strategies could be that would really help, and then we just thought we'd also share some books, books that we love, and the suggestions that you might want to read at home if you don't already have them at home, or if you've never read them before, either from a library and so on. A lot of these things we don't necessarily have to read out loud because they're going to be on this presentation, and as far as I know, it's all going to be shared with you as parents anyway. So things like links, titles of books and so on, hopefully you can just pick those up at your leisure when you want to go back through this presentation when they get sent out to you. Okay, all right, so we've got a few slides first of all that just have got reading is massive on the school agenda at the moment, rightly so. It should never really not be huge on the school agenda. It is so important, but there's been a lot of sort of research over the last probably get on for 20 years now that really looks at how important reading is in terms of things like social mobility, life chances, all of those things that maybe you kind of maybe had not associated as being quite so crucial to these early steps of reading. Now, that's not to make anyone feel guilty if they haven't been doing loads of reading already, just that the more you can do, it's amazing the power that it holds in terms of helping your children as they grow into adulthood. And hopefully, of course, they'll gain a love of reading at the same time, which will see them through the rest of their lives. I know that as a parent myself, I was really keen, just to make sure that my children felt like reading was a real positive time spent either together or on their own. So again, I'm not going to read through everything that's on these slides, but just to give you an idea of what those benefits are, hopefully you'll get a chance to read them if you haven't already had a little cursory look while I've been chatting. There's some of that research. You kind of really go down into sort of the nitty gritty of minutes spent on reading and the power that can have and the effect that can have. Say a child that maybe reads 1 minute a day to someone who maybe reads 20 minutes a day. And obviously we're talking about children who are reception age. So a lot of the reading that they do will be with you. It would be with an adult. There may well be some that like to read independently, that like to pick up a book and thumb through it and read through, but we are kind of making the assumption that when we talk about reading, we're talking talking about books being shared together, adults and children. But obviously those skills, it's amazing how quickly they can snowball into independent reading once they really get going. We see that in the school all the time, children just going into the reading corner, picking up a book, playing teachers, reading and sharing. And that's because they're seeing practice being modelled by us and obviously what they've seen at home as well. So like the other thing, children love to mimic. The more you read with them, the more that they will try and do that themselves because they'll want to do that. So it mentioned there about being a role model. It's the best way to see yourself as a parent, as an educator of any kind, is to think of whatever I do will have that impact that the children will want to mimic because they'll see it as a positive experience. And just down at the bottom there is the official report that went into researching just how much of an impact on life chances reading has. A love of reading, positive views of reading, and the sort of the future academic success that has. It uses big fancy words like socio-economic backgrounds and so on like that. All of these things are really important, and perhaps until the last 20 years, perhaps wasn't really necessarily treated as being quite so crucial to that. But it seems that the evidence bears that out. And here, Ms. Telford's going to talk about this in a little bit more detail a little bit later on. But again, just so you've got an understanding of why in school reading is so important. This is sort of, the nitty gritty that comes from our early learning goals, our EYFS curriculum. Sorry to be using acronyms already, but EYFS is early years foundation stage. So that's like our curriculum before the children join the national curriculum in year 1. And in terms of the literacy goals, the things that we'd like them to achieve, that can be broken down in terms of reading into comprehension and into word reading. And that's been a slight change, but I'm going to let Ms. Telford talk about that because I don't want to steal her thunder. But again, it's just there in sort of black and white for you that as teachers, as well as wanting to develop a love of reading, we're also trying to build up some really key skills. And that's it in a nutshell. That's it there. That's what we're trying to hope that the children can do in readiness for year 1. So again, I know I don't want to read it all to you, but hopefully you've had a sort of a cursory look and then feel like you can go back and sort of gen up on it a little bit later. Okay, this is an example of something that we share right the way through the school. So, our children are in reception. This is their first year in school, and it may well be that they stay with us right the way until A level. And obviously, we sincerely hope that they do. So, a lot of things that happen in our school, if they're happening in reception, it's amazing how many of them also happen right the way through to sixth form. And one of them is making a literacy and a numeracy focus every term. So we try to display those, and this is the current one. And as it turns out, it's supporting reading, wouldn't you know? So it's, again, a little graphic that maybe for our children looks quite technical, but the idea is that, again, they get used to seeing it as they move through the school. So it really becomes part of the culture of reading in school. Excuse me, I think that might be my phone. Beg your pardon, I should have just silenced that. I do beg your pardon.
It's not as embarrassing as my ringtone.
I know,
so it's fine.
I'm sorry. I'll have to do this. I can't get rid of that.
Technology. Do you want me to run out?
There we go. I paused. I couldn't find the pause button there. I do apologise. Right. So, excuse me. So yes, we were saying about these posters. So again, it's not so much incumbent on our children because there's a lot of features of reading, but actually everything that's on that sheet, we would hope. I'm just going to add in one more.
Yes.
That's all right. There we go. All of those things are part of the experience of children in reception when they join us. So in terms of posh words like clarifying and predicting and summarizing, well, actually, we still do all of those things with our youngest children as well, because we ask them about what happens next in a story. We ask them to tell us what happened on the last page. We ask them to maybe use some specific words when they're describing a character, for instance. So all of those things actually happen in reception as well. So we just wanted to share that sort of continuity with the things that happen in school. You may well have been involved in this as well, the reading survey. You might have been, well, you were asked. Whether you decided to respond or not was totally up to you. And here's a sort of some headlines that came from the first school responses. I think it went right the way up to the middle school as well, but certainly the first school responses you might be interested to see. We asked our children as well. Sorry, I think the parent surveys are a bit later, I beg your pardon. These are the ones where we asked the children themselves, I should say, if they read every day, if they read not at all. And as you can see, we're bound to get some that feel that they don't read very much. And of course, therefore, we always think, well, what can we do to improve that? And doing this workshop is obviously one of those ways that we can address that. If we want to get more children reading at home and less children saying that they don't read at all because their parents are giving them more opportunities to read and making it more of a culture in their own homes, then again, that's exactly what the point of this is. And hopefully it will make it easier for you after we've spoken a bit more about what you can do to support if you're not already doing those things already. But we would like to think that we do have a school in which reading is already valued, but we're always thinking about how we can value that even more, and how we can raise the profile of that even more. You know, what can we do year in, year out to really sort of up the ante? So again, some lovely coloured pie charts there that give an idea of how children responded when they were asked those questions. And again, something for you maybe just to pore over when you've got a little bit more time. Okay, so then we're going to move on to some things that really, because we're talking as educators, but we're also thinking really about how we can help you to make reading something that is a big part of your lives at home, again, if it's not already, how you can build up that culture, because really at the end of the day we want children just to love reading. Yes, we want them to get fantastic GCSE results and get fantastic A-level results and all those sorts of things, but essentially what we really want to do is make children love reading. So obviously modelling and enjoyment of reading is something we talked about a little bit a few seconds ago. Little and often, parents often ask us at parents' evening, you might well have asked the question yourself, what can I do already? And I always say, if children feel like they're sort of finding it a bit of a drag for whatever reason, then you just have to keep scaling it back. Smaller amounts of time, smaller chunks, but more often, giving lots of breaks. So for instance, if you feel like you've tried something and they're just exasperated and they've had enough now, that is absolutely fine to stop it and to come back to it maybe even tomorrow or even just a few hours later. But if you keep thinking that little and often is definitely the key. If you feel like you've got to finish a book before they can finally stop, then unfortunately that's going to be detrimental really to their enjoyment of it all. I know as a parent, we love to talk about reading. Miss Telford is a big film fan, big reading fan. We like to talk about things like this in our culture because they're just enjoyable. So if we can do that with our children as well, we're going to sort of increase their enjoyment of something just by purely talking about it. If they feel like they're being tested all the time, that might be a little bit different. If they feel like they're being put on the spot. So again, it's about making it conversational. It's about talking about likes and dislikes, sharing opinions, the kind of thing you might find that the internet is very good at doing nowadays, isn't it? Sharing opinions, but again, doing it in a way that doesn't feel like they're necessarily always being asked for the right answer. It's just really just about talking, book talk, if you like. Sometimes, and this can go right the way up to juniors, year 6, I should say. Sometimes picture books can be dismissed, not so much obviously in reception because the majority of the books that the children will be reading will be full of pictures, but actually just taking the time, sometimes not always to do the actual reading of the words, but just to spend time reading the image and finding out what can be gained from looking at that image. Illustration is so important in books. If it wasn't, the illustrator wouldn't have been commissioned to do it. And it's amazing what knowledge and what book talk can come out of just looking at pictures. There are books in year 6 that have been deliberately written without words for that very reason, for the amount of what we call inference and deduction, where the children can really sort of get down to what they feel and what sort of feelings they have about a story, what opinions they can glean from what they see in pictures, which might actually be quite different from the words that are written on the page. Again, I'm talking about maybe slightly older children here, but certainly with our children at the age they are, most of the time the picture is also a huge clue, isn't it, as to what's going on in the story or that particular sentence. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute. We've mentioned audio books there in the age of Kindles, and I know they've all moved on now to I've forgotten the app, the famous app, sort of all the book apps where you can stream, as it were, all the stories and so on. Just finding time to use them, journeys around the house, kitchen, when children are baking, whatever it might be, whatever sort of floats your boat in that sense. But actually thinking of times when maybe the TV can be turned off and maybe an audio book can be put on. A lot of research has been shown into the fact that that sort of osmosis of children hearing stories all around can be particularly rewarding. Okay, so we've mentioned reading culture already as well. We're talking a little bit there about feeling that in your house is a house that really values reading, and that would really be a routine, would have to be established. Not so much a timetable drawn up, but that sort of informal process where, bedtime becomes associated with a reading time, or if that's not a good time for you, that just before dinner time or whenever it might be. But when you feel like you've actually managed to establish a routine, if that's not already in your home, and I do appreciate that a lot of you will be doing a lot of these things anyway, but we're also kind of making the assumption that if you've come along today, you might like to hear these things as messages again. Talks about being a reading role model, drawing attention not only to the fact that you're interested in what the children are reading, but also that you yourself as a reader. Do the children see you as a reader? Do your children see you reading? And if they don't, do they at least know what book you've got by your bed, for instance? All those sorts of things help your child to see you as someone who loves reading and maybe wants to talk about reading. And therefore, again, it's that positive framing of reading. I know libraries at the moment, I'm not quite sure. I know our one where we would normally go, we've found it hard to get along in the last year, but obviously once they are open again, getting along to a library is crucial. We used to make it like a little afternoon affair, only short because sometimes they didn't want to do that, my children. But again, it's framing that as the trip to the library is a nice half hour spent. I realise I've jumped ahead there. Sorry, because I was talking about home libraries as well. Obviously, the amount of books you have in your home can differ hugely between families. So it might well be that it just becomes a reading basket, first of all, in which a number of books are kept. But then, of course, that can grow and grow and grow and grow. You might already be a family that has bookshelf after bookshelf after bookshelf of books, and really takes pride in displaying those, and your child likes to access them already. But even if it's just a case of starting small, just having somewhere where those books are collected and looked after and cherished really helps to build that culture. Cozy reading spaces. I know that most of my reading with my children was always done on the bed just before bedtime, but of course just cuddling up on the sofa, wherever it might be, as long as, again, the children have positive feelings towards their time spent reading. Mentioned audiobooks as well. A nice little one at the end, of course, was using books as treats. From a personal point of view, I love it when someone gives me a book as a present. It's my favourite present. But again, associating a holiday time with a book to share, a book that can be special, that can be taken away, or even a magazine, any kind of reading material really that is viewed as being a kind of treat because you're going off to do something special. And then, of course, the memories of that holiday can be associated. I know my own memories are often associated with trips to whatever dark and dingy part of the Lake District or the Scottish Highlands. I can still remember what books we were reading on that holiday. So again, just building up really positive feelings in the children towards the books that they're reading. Okay, now onto sort of the nitty gritty. I'm keeping my eye on the clock because this is a bit where Ms. Telford and I are going to sort of talk you through some techniques. So we've still got a good sort of 12 minutes. We're going to end pretty much on past because we've got other Zoom meetings and we don't want to clash with those. So we're going to sort of get to the nitty gritty about the actual strategies that you can use. And this is where really it dovetails quite nicely with what you might have seen if you were able to access the Google Classroom, either live when we did our live Google Meets, or whether you were able to watch those. So I brought along my handy reading scheme book because, of course, phonics is absolutely crucial to those early building blocks. That then leads into word and sentence building. But then, as Ms. Telford's going to talk about, we've got the big element of comprehension, which you will have seen mentioned when we talked about the early learning goals, which are all key reading skills. The whole of these together are reading. It's not just about decoding words. It's about being able to actually understand what has been decoded. So, what I've done here is I've cut and pasted a page from the Letters and Sounds website, which we use as a resource, because you don't necessarily need to know all the titles, but Letters and Sounds is the program that we follow, if you didn't already know. And it gives you an idea of where we're trying to get our children to, what building blocks they're going to need by the end of reception in order to make them ready for year one and the next stage. So a lot of the terminology on here, don't worry if you don't understand, but basically what we've got here is a list of sounds that we really feel like if the children have got those by the end of reception, then they're well on their way for age-related expectations. So we've got things like what we call a vowel digraph. So all of those sounds there are the sounds that we are introducing to the children. If they haven't already been introduced to them, they will have been introduced to them by the end of year 3, and they will know how to recognize them. Obviously, not everybody will necessarily. Some children will develop at different paces, but that's the idea. That's what we're aiming for. We call this phase 3. Again, you don't necessarily need to know that, but we would like all children to really feel confident in phase 3. We'd like them to also dip into phase 4. And all that means is they're starting to blend some of the other letters together. So all of the sounds that you can see in green, where it says consonant digraphs and vowel digraphs, those are where 2 letters make 1 sound or 3 letters make 1 sound. But we know in our language that we can blend letters together like T and R, T and R to make tr. It's not a separate sound, it's still 2 sounds, but we say them so close together, it almost sounds like a sound. And that's all phase 4 does. So we would also like our children to feel like they're starting to do that a bit better. We call that blending, where we blend a sound that we can hear, we blend it together to make a word. But actually, if we can help them to make a bit of a shortcut to sounds like tr and sl, all those sorts of sounds, if we can do that, give those little shortcuts, then they'll be really ready for year one. And then it says tricky words. They're the words that actually we find they don't quite follow the same phonic patterns that we have been teaching this year. So for instance, if you looked at the word he, really that should say he, or you look at she, that should really say she, and we, we, and so on. So that's why we call them tricky, because we can't necessarily, they don't just follow that pattern. As the children get older, when they go into year one, they will learn that E on its own can make the E sound. But at the moment, keeping things as simple as we can for these children, that's why they're called tricky words. So we have a list of them as well that we really want our children to learn. The only other thing that's not on that list, I don't think, yeah, it's just, oh no, it does, sorry, beg your pardon. It mentions about learning the alphabet name. So we tend to talk about sounds and the sounds that letters make, not necessarily their letter names, but we do want our children to also know that. So they basically know the classic alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. But that isn't so useful when we're using phonics to build words up. Okay, so I do apologize if everybody here was able to get along to those reading lessons and those phonic lessons that we were doing over the lockdown, but essentially it was just a chance to really talk about what we might do. So I'm going to treat you ever so slightly like you're my class at the moment. Okay, if I was to pick up this book here, this is what we call stage 2, which is stage 2 Oxford Reading Tree, but it's also what is it? It's the red. It's the red stage, which is what we call the universal book banding. So no matter what reading scheme a book is from, if it's got the red band next to it, that means it's like stage 2. Okay, and again, we would really like our children to finish reception on it would be yellow, which is the same as Oxford Reading Tree stage 3. I'm really concerned that I might be sort of blinding people with the terminology and the technology, the science of this. What's most important is really that as they're building up these sounds, the ones that are on the screen, for instance, and by the way, it doesn't mention all of the single letter sounds, which, you know, I hope you've sort of taken as read that we've learned them, like ah, b, k, d, all of those sorts of things. You'll notice that when we talk and we use sounds, we try really, really carefully to make sure we try and make the actual sound that children need. So the old-fashioned way of saying b and d and k and t and s and f, those sorts of things, they don't actually really help children. They can actually bring in misconceptions. So you'll often hear us, it's a bit hard when you're trying to get a sound across a computer, but you might hear us say f and s and d and k. We can almost breathe the sounds rather than say them, because actually, if you actually start to build them up that way, that's when you can make the words. So just
Would
as
you like me to stop sharing so they can see you?
Oh yes, yes, that's a good idea. Thank you, Miss Telford.
Okay.
I'll keep my eye on the time, so I want Miss Telford to be able to do her bit as well. So in a nutshell, when we've got this sentence here, when it says Kim has a cat, Jim has a dog, okay, if we're breaking those up into our sounds and we're helping our children, if they are really at that early stage, what we want the children to do is feel that actually we can maybe read it to them first. And that we are really going to use that. We're not putting them on the spot. We're not going to test them. We're really trying to get the children to feel like they can actually have as many scaffolds as possible. So if I was to read this to them first, I would be saying, K, I, Kim, a, s, has, a, k, a, t, cat. Okay, and then of course, then it would be their turn. All right, and it's really important. Again, you probably heard me say all of these things before if you were part of the Google Classroom, but it's really important that we try and help, that we're not putting the children on the spot. So for instance, if they feel like they say, I don't know, that's absolutely fine. You have to be patient with them, and we'll model that to them again. So therefore, if they say, I still don't recognize that sound, but you think you know they do, it's a really good opportunity to be patient with them and just to say, okay, well, it's my turn then. I'll have a go. K, I, Can you do that? Can you have a go at that? Can you try that? And although it's a bit hard to get the interaction when we were doing that during the Google Classroom, we were trying to kind of give the children the opportunity after my modeling for them to have a go. And of course, if they don't need that modeling, then that's fine. They just crack on and they can hopefully build that up. What I do with the children as well is that sometimes that can be quite a laborious process. So by the time they've sounded out K, I, and remembered it says Kim, then they move on to a, s, has. they might have forgotten that they've just read Kim. So I always, as a reader, as a parent or as a teacher, I'll always go back and read whatever they've just said. So if they've just got up to cat, but they can't remember the last bit of the sentence, I'll go back and say, yes, Kim has a cat, even if they've just read the word cat. And of course, for some children as well, maybe just reading one word in a sentence is enough, and they'll need your support to keep doing that. The idea is, of course, that you must feel that actually the children get the support they need rather than being put on the spot all the time. Okay. Because so that Mr. Telford has got opportunity to talk about comprehension, that's just an extremely sort of short version of sentence building and word building, because I know that a lot of it hopefully have been part of those lessons before. If at any point we feel like from parent feedback we need to do a whole section just on that, then maybe that's something that between Mr. Stewart and I we can do. But I'm going to hand over to Ms. Telford so she can talk a little bit about comprehension with you. Okay.
Okay, sorry, was it this one?
Yes, it was that one.
Okay. Let's see if I can go to our where we were up to. This one. Okay, hopefully you can see that all right. I'll be as brief as I can. It was basically to tell you that this year we'll be adopting something called the early adopters, which is a change in our early learning goals, which is essentially how we assess the children to see if they're year one ready. So for example, it says their current early learning goals. So the ones that we used last year was very much reading and writing. It was two separate things. And a lot of the comprehension side of things was involved more in the listening and attention. So are children listening to the story? Do they understand what's happening? And it was all part of that understanding. This year, however, comprehension is going to be its own section. So if you have a look at the screen, it says key changes. So there's now going to be a focus on comprehension. That's basically, do the children understand what they've read? So a lot of the children now who are getting very confident in reading sentences, it's just checking that they understand what they've read, even if it is, as Mr. Stirk said, a very simple sentence like the cat has a red hat. What color does is the hat? Okay, or who is wearing a hat? It's the cat, it's red, and so on and so forth. So for example, there it's linked to the understanding element of communication and language. So again, when we're reading things to them, do they understand what they've read? And it's the same kind of thing when they're reading their own things, do they understand what it is that they have read as well? And that also includes reading the sentences that they are writing as well. Do they understand what they've written? There's also a word reading strand, which I think is really helpful for a lot of our children. Originally, it was very much they need to be able to read a simple sentence, whereas now being able to read words has become its own strand, which I think is really good for children. I think a lot of the early learning goals now, early adopters, are a lot more easier to achieve, and I think it'll help a lot of children with their confidence in that. So numbers and sound and digraphs, children need to know and say are stated, so they now need to understand this many digraphs. I'm not entirely sure how many.
It's like, I think it's 10.
10.
I think it's any 10.
Yeah, so things like when you've got your shut, I mean, we've already done more than 10. So I think for the most part, a lot of our children have achieved that already. Greater emphasis on vocabulary. So again, when they're coming to writing, can we go beyond just saying the cat is there, I can see a cat, I can see a dog, really exploring that vocabulary. And obviously we as teachers do read them a lot of stories, so they will be exposed to a lot more vocabulary with that. I'll skip through these. Basically, handwriting's a focus now, which it is throughout the school anyway, but it's now part of early years where we look at letter formation. But again, that forms part of our phonics sessions anyway. There's no longer mention of writing common exception words. That's your tricky words. So that is now no longer a focus. It used to be that they had to be able to spell and write tricky words, but now it's just incorporated within probably the word building side of things. No longer mention of phonetically plausible spellings. So basically it was saying, can children write a word that sounds phonetically correct? So if they're trying to write a longer word, like when we were doing polar bear facts, we had the word celebration and they would like celebration. That's phonetically plausible, but that's no longer needed. This is how we will be assessing them this year. Again, don't look at it and be terrified by it. You know, it's up to us, but very much I think that a lot of these are a lot more achievable. I think it's a happy, healthy way of looking at it, really. I think a lot of our children are able to do this anyway, and it gives us a real focus to work towards. So for example, comprehension, demonstrate understanding of what they have read. So when we're reading the story to them, or when we're doing our talk for write stories, do they understand the story that we have read them? So for example, Jack and the Beanstalk, what does he do? He climbs a beanstalk. What's at the top? A giant. So things like that. And using, anticipating what happens in stories. So having, We've been signed out because. Oh, have we been kicked out?
Signed in on another device. Oh, does that mean I can see?
I have no
Can you?
idea.
Would you mind just give us a quick thumbs up? I can see the Pattersons there. Can you give us? Can you still see us? Right, we're going to carry on then. We got a rather sort of worrying message that just says we have to.
So I'll just ignore that.
We might be able to carry on.
You know what? I think we'll probably end it there. To be honest, you'll be sent out this PowerPoint anyway. It's just to say that comprehension now is a part of their assessment. Really, it used to be part of other categories within their early learning goals, but now it's part of the literacy. And again, I think it's a good addition more than anything. We do a lot of talk for writing, which is where we learn stories anyway. So a comprehension will filter into that. And I think I'll probably leave it there.
Sure.
Because it's nearly half-past and we're going to get kicked out.
We'll see what happens next. If you can stay with it, if you've got an older pupil and you maybe have to go to another meeting, that's absolutely fine. I'll just go through the last 2 slides. It's just a collection of books that we think you might enjoy if you don't already have them at home, or you can get hold of them somehow via libraries.
Sorry, I'll just squeeze in. For those children who maybe don't like some of the books we send home, there is a set of books called World of Reading, and they're very simple, like comic style things. So it's about Spider-Man. And it's very simple sentences like Spider-Man went out for the day.
We've just found out in order for Mrs. O'Keefe to start her meeting, we have to come out of this one. So one last thing, I'm going to speak to Mrs. Stewart if we can maybe almost do another session just purely on the actual physical acts of reading, because I'd love to spend a bit more time on that. But I hope you don't mind. We'll have to leave it there. There's one more slide in which she's got some links, but all of this will be sent out to you, so you'll be able to read those at your pleasure. But if you don't mind, we will have to leave it there so that the other meeting can start. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming along. We really appreciate you making the effort to do so. Okay, goodbye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Stop record. Yeah.